or two of their actors survived having his hull ever shot down. Wanted to set a good tone. So in the first 4 days they were on station, they flew 150 combat sorties over North Vietnam. On the 29th of July, there were more than 40 airplanes in the flight deck, prepping for an 1100 go. The Phantoms were loaded with Mark 80 series bombs and Zuni rocket pods. The A-4s were loaded with Korean War vintage Mark 65s, which they received from the ammo ship Diamond Head the evening prior. Around 10:53, a Zuni rocket from an F-4 piloted by Lieutenant Commander Jim Banger, his airplane was parked starboard side, shot across the flight deck and hit an A-4 parked on the port side aft. It was piloted by Lieutenant Commander Fred White. Immediately, 400 gallons of jet fuel blasted from the fuel tank of the White's jet onto the flight deck and spread to the adjacent airplanes, including the one just forward, Skyhawk 416, piloted by John McCain. Immediately after that, at least one of the two vintage 1,000-pound bombs under the wing of White's A-4 fell to the deck. Less than a minute after the fire broke out, Chief Aviation Boatswain's Mate Gerald Ferrier, who was the head of the firefighting crew, arrived on the scene and began battling the blaze around the bombs on the flight deck with a handheld fire extinguisher. About 20 seconds later, the first of the hose crews arrived, and they put salt water on the forward boundary of the fire. 30 seconds after that, the bomb exploded. The first two fire crews on the scene were decimated. 9 seconds later, a second bomb exploded even more violently. Within the first 5 minutes of the disaster, the aft end of the carrier was rocked by 7 more major explosions. The fires were fed by 40,000 gallons of jet fuel spilling from tanks and fuel cells ripped by blasts and shrapnel. The explosion smashed holes in the 2-inch thick armored flight deck. Flaming and unburned fuel, water, and fire-retardant foam cascaded into the compartments below, which were primarily crew berthing areas. While the fire on the flight deck was contained within an hour, those below raged until 0400 the next day. As a result of the fires and explosions, 134 sailors and airmen died, and 161 others were seriously wounded. Of those who died, only 28 had been on the flight deck. 50 died while asleep in their racks. 21 of the 73 aircraft on board were destroyed, with another 40 damaged. Repairing the carrier cost $72 million. Destroyed aircraft accounted for another $44.5 million, with another $10 million to repair the damaged aircraft. Ordnance loss was valued at $1.95 million, and supplies and equipment destroyed were put at $3.15 million. The Navy's final report found problems in the Zuni launching pod. Attachment cords between the pod and its mounting rail in the aircraft, called pigtails, carried the electrical firing charge from a switch on the pilot's control stick to the rocket's igniter. Pins on the pigtail could be bent, which caused a short circuit. Further, there were 2 separate safety procedures to prevent an inadvertent firing of the Zuni, but their ship's safety committees chose to bypass the safety procedure in the interest of getting aircraft off the deck as soon as possible. The investigation determined that the rocket fired from the pilot of the F-4, Lieutenant Commander Banger, carrying the Zuni, switched power sources. Back in these days, Phantoms required external starter to get the turbines going. And then once the engines were running, the generators were on, pilot would switch from external power to internal power. In this case, when Banger did that, there was a brief spike of electrical energy, which by itself would not have launched the Zuni. However, with the pigtail connected, the electricity had a route to the rocket. With the safety pin pulled, the Zuni was electrically and mechanically free to be fired. The investigation's other major finding had to do with the ordnance on the flight deck. 80 bombs totaling 24.5 tons of high explosives were on board the 15 attack aircraft. 16 old Mark 65 1,000-pound bombs accounted for 8 of those tons. 7 of them exploded in what is known as a high-order fashion. According to the investigation report, those old bombs, which were manufactured in 1953, were filled with composite B explosive, and they'd been stored for years on Okinawa or Guam. Unlike modern explosives, the Mark 80 series that the Phantoms were carrying, Comp B became unstable with age, especially in hot, humid storage conditions. Also, the Mark 65s were what are known as thin-skinned, meaning the outer casings were just thick enough to hold the explosives and their shape. The more modern Mark 80 series bombs on board Forrestal had thicker skins, which provided significantly more insulation for the explosives from heat shock. The report also addressed some firefighting issues. The most effective means of fighting a fuel fire on board a ship is with foam, which blankets the flames and fuel source, which basically smothers the fire. Water, on the other hand, only serves as a cooling agent. It tends to spread the fire around as the fuel floats on top of the water. As mentioned, the first major explosion took out the two main firefighting crews and the foam hoses they were using. The water used by the later crews, who were not part of the damage control teams, but just crew members trying to do their part, actually spread the fire rather than put it out. Now, as you'd expect, there were a number of changes made after the Forrestal fire. Zuni safety procedures were reevaluated and strengthened. The old bombs, the Mark 65s, were removed from the munitions pipeline, and the Mark 80 series bombs were given a plastic-like coating as a further insulation against fire. An intensive firefighting school at a facility named after Chief Farrier became mandatory for all sailors. Now, in recent years, a conspiracy theory has emerged that blames the late Senator John McCain for starting the Forrestal fire. So this rumor talks about McCain doing what was known in the A4 as a wet start, which happens when the igniters in the engine do not energize or fire before the Allies' fuel enters the hot section of the engine. If the pilot does a wet start, the pooled fuel can shoot out of the tailpipe in an impressive flame. But if you look at how the airplanes were oriented when the Zuni went off, McCain's A4 was spotted on the port quarter with his tail hanging over the deck pointed at the ocean. The Phantom that launched the Zuni spotted on the starboard quarter, also with its tail pointed over the deck. There's physically no way flame from McCain's A4 could have reached around 180 degrees, crossed 100 feet of flight deck to ignite the F-4 Zuni. So that particular conspiracy theory is bogus. Forrestal was repaired and ultimately returned to fight until she was finally decommissioned.